Yeah, it's 8 o'clock now, and welcome to yet another session of SCIMS, this is Surgical Clinics of SIMS Hospital, Chennai, and with me is Dr. Gautam, my associate. And at this juncture, when there is some bit of a relief in COVID, I think the country over, and it's nice the efforts all over have borne fruition, and I'm sure again my heart goes to all those people who are working in the forefront, working day and night, and also that a lot of postgraduates are either in COVID duty or post-COVID, and for them to participate become very difficult, and that's the reason why learning general surgery has not been very active during the second session, second lockdown. We hope once the lockdown is over and everybody is free, I think we'll get back to active academics. And I welcome a great friend Pradhaban, who's done wonderful lectures on the anatomy. We wish he's done more anatomy lectures in the GI tract in the future. But then he will be presenting a series of high-end GI cases from now on, and I'll give you the more details in LGS as and when we are very concrete about it. And today's is an interesting case of intestinal mucormycosis. This is a non-COVID mucor, so everyone will be wondering that the mucor is in the air. I was discussing with Gautam and a couple of others as to why is it that when there's a huge wave of COVID in the US, the UK, Spain, Brazil, Iran, there's not so much mucormycosis, and why there's so much mucormycosis in India? What is so special about it? And there are a lot of speculations that something to do with diabetes or steroid overusage and equipment and so on and so forth. But this mucor seems to be a very dangerous disease, and it's got such high mortality. Actually, first time I ever seen a mucor was during my stay in AIIMS Delhi many years ago. Then when I had to operate on a gastric perforation, and when I opened the abdomen, I saw the whole stomach is black from inside. We did a sort of partial gastrectomy and did anastomosis. Histopath came as mucor. The patient didn't survive for more than 48 hours, and I understood. Maybe I had seen maybe 2 or 3 more cases the last 2-3 decades, and understood that mucor is a very dangerous disease.
Sir, you're on mute, sir.
Okay. And to present today's case, Dr. Gautam, a consultant GI surgeon from SIMS. Over to Gautam.
Good evening, sir. Sir, as you had put forth, now it is raining mucormycosis everywhere, but I would still say it is the intestine part is still not caught up with that area, though there have been news reports of intestinal mucormycosis also being reported. I think 2 cases from Gangaram have been reported, yet to come into the English literature as such. So this is a patient whom we had admitted and attended to last year. That is after in the period of November. Just thought we'll have a discussion on him, given the likelihood of seeing more of these kind of patients in the coming days. So this gentleman is a 51-year-old gentleman who was actually admitted elsewhere with acute coronary syndrome. He actually presented to the hospital, initial hospital, in cardiogenic shock. So he was resuscitated. After resuscitation, he underwent a coronary angiogram which showed a triple vessel disease, and subsequently he underwent a coronary artery bypass graft for all the 3 vessels, 1 arterial and 2 venous. Post-operatively, the patient continued to require ventilator support. There was evidence of raising creatinine levels After day 4, he started spiking fever. So patient was started on empirical broad spectrum antibiotics such as meropenem and linezolid. Despite all these measures, he continued to spike fevers. His counts were increasing in nature. The organ support was also required for a prolonged period of time. So it was all a hypothesis due to persistent sepsis, and he was shifted to our center. So he was admitted in our ICU on POD10 following the bypass surgery. At the time of admission, he was conscious. GCS was 10T. He did have generalized edema all over the body, and he required dopamine infusion for maintaining pressure, and he required mechanical ventilator pressure support mode to maintain saturation. His abdomen at the time of admission was distended, however, was soft. So patient had been receiving uh, nutrition by means of a nasogastric tube for probably 5 days in the previous center, and we actually plan to continue the same. On admission, we continued the uh, antibiotics that was started at the earlier institutes, the meropenem and linezolid. His initial blood investigation, apart from the leukocytosis, also confirmed acute kidney injury with an raised creatinine level and hyperkalemia. We had an CPK also done, which also was grossly elevated, it was around 3,000. And there was also evidence of myoglobin detected in the urine, which suggested the possibility of rhabdomyolysis, and the patient was attended to for the same. We repeated all the cultures in view of the sepsis patient was suffering from: blood culture, urine culture, the endotracheal tube culture. He was planned for tracheostomy the next day, since we were not able to wean him off. So the next day, the patient had a large bout of hematochezia, which was, to say frank, along with mixed with clots. There was some altered blood also there. And this was associated with a drop in pressure, which required an increased inotropic support. The hemoglobin fell from 8 to 6.2. So it was basically a massive GA bleed. The right tube was it was clear. There was no aspirate as such, bloody aspirate. In view of the massive bleed, patient underwent an CT. So this is the arterial phase of the CT. We can see the bilateral lower zone consolidation that is present more on the right side than the left. There is also mild pleural effusion on either side. Now coming into the abdominal part, we can see the free fluid in the perihepatic region. There's also free fluid along adjacent to the pancreas, around the perisplenic. I also want to make a note of the diffuse abdominal edema that the patient is suffering from. The celiac axis, the SMA all looked normal at the level of origin. This is the bowel wall, which is now the distal ileum, the distal jejunum and ileal segments have started showing some edema in the submucosal nature. There is also some amount of mesenteric fat standing noted in the right lower zone. Then we come to the ileum part, where we started seeing an arterial blush in the mid ileal segment. So I'll just again run through. We can find that this is the hyper enhanced. This is the hyper enhancement that is seen due to an arterial blush. If we follow it through the subsequent cuts, we can see it arising from the bowel wall as such. So it was a small intestinal bleed that we're dealing with the arterial phase. To characterize it further, I'll just go to the lesion per se. The other findings are similar. See, this is the persistent arterial blush. In fact, we can start seeing some pooling. But I also want to make a note of the enhancement of the bowel wall here. The bubble wall here and the adjacent segment doesn't show any enhancement here, but we can see the enhancement pattern here, uh, indicating there is an bowel ischemia also occurring in this individual. So we thought, given the cardiac arrest patient had, given the multiple inotropic support he was on, and coronary bypass surgery that was done, so the clinical diagnosis of non-occlusive mesenteric ischemia with a GI bleed was made. This is to just compare the both arterial and venous phases. You can find the enhancement pattern on the bowel wall in certain segments, but in certain segments it is absent. So then he was planned for surgical exploration. Intraoperatively, there was 100 centimeters ileum, which was patchy gangrenous, and there was a focal perforation also present. The gangrenous segment was resected with an distal subclosure and then proximal ileostomy. This was a transmural necrosis that has occurred in places. Intraoperative photo. This is the macroscopic photo where we can find there was patchy gangrene. At one place it was full thickness, and there was also perforation somewhere here. This is just a closer image of the gangrene. After the surgery, patient continued to deteriorate. He went in for acute renal shutdown. There was worsening acidosis. We changed the antibiotic based on the intraoperative peritoneal fluid culture. It showed carbapenem-resistant Klebsiella as well as Enterococcus faecium. And we did a CARBA-R gene analysis, which showed the presence of OXO48 and NDM genes. Based on this, patient was started on ceftazidime, avibactam, as well as Aztreonab. Or he didn't show much of improvement. He continued to deteriorate. He underwent even a low SLED for the anuria and acidosis. Despite all these measures, patient succumbed on the third postoperative day. Then came the histopathology, where the part of gangrene was confirmed. We had a transmural necrosis of the bowel wall. But on closer analysis, we also could detect fungal hyphae that were present. Which was involving both the bowel wall as well as the vessels, major vessels, mesenteric vessels, which are supplying the bowel wall, which we are dealing with. This is the high power section, which shows the fungal mycelium within the blood vessel. This is just to characterize the type of branching. We can see that is almost aseptate fungi, which is branching at less than right angles, suggestive of the entire picture is suggestive of an mucormycosis. So coming to the discussion part, we'll be having a brief introduction about mucormycosis as such. What is the pathophysiology? What is the spectrum? And then a focused review of the intestinal mucormycosis, and finally the take-home points today. So mucormycosis is basically fungal infection, which is generally associated with high mortality. The reason it is called mucormycosis is it is caused by organisms belonging to the order Mucorales. Earlier, the terminology of zygomyces or zygomycosis was used, wherein organisms which belong to the class of Zygomyces was the causative organism. Later on, nowadays we don't use the term zygomycosis, it is now mucormycosis. They have shown an increased incidence given the number of organ transplantations increasing, the patients on with malignancy was undergoing chemotherapy. Also patients with more common immunocompromised status such as diabetes mellitus. So as I said, it is because of the name comes from the originates from the order Mucorales. The species as such can be from various genus such as Rhizopus, Mucor, Rhizomucor. So all these are the common genus. These are not the only ones. These are not exhaustive. These are the common ones. They are actually present ubiquitous. It is not like they are present only when they cause infection. They are present everywhere. And they are thermotolerant, and they usually grow on dead tissues, necrotic tissues. And typically their morphology is aseptate or pauciseptate broad ribbon-like hyphae, which are either irregular with or right angle branching. So this is the image that shows the various families and genus which come under the order of Mucorales. So any of these organisms can be the causative organism. It is not like mycosis is caused only by Rhizopus, Mucor alone. So any of these organisms has the potential to cause, or when they cause that kind of a picture, it is called as mucormycosis. The earlier classification of zygomycosis was derived from this class of zygomycete, which also includes other orders and other genus like Basidio-bolomycosis. So earlier literature survey, if we start doing, even they were termed as zygomycosis. Nowadays, Basidio-bolomycosis is now no longer called as a mucormycosis. It comes under a separate category. What are the risk factors for patients to develop mucormycosis? It's basically seen in immunocompromised individuals. A very, very small fraction of cases have been reported in immunocompetent hosts. The reason why immunocompromised individuals are affected is and decreased number of either mononuclear or neutrophils, or with their either numbers or with their functional capacity. The functioning can be affected by means of either an hyperglycemia in a diabetic individual or when the patient is on steroids. The common conditions wherein we see are the ones which are listed in this table. The one on the left are the more common ones, such as hematological malignancies like AML, ALL, who are on chemotherapy induction phase or the maintenance phase. Those patients who are post hematopoietic stem cell transplant, those patients after solid organ transplants such as renal, liver, multivisceral transplants, patients who are on steroids for some rheumatological conditions. Even there is one patient which I'll be discussing where who had steroids given for inflammatory bowel disease and diabetes mellitus. So these are the common risk factors or the common background in which we are likely to have patients affected by mucormycosis. The other groups are the ones of patients receiving desferoxamine therapy for iron load. Nowadays, it is less commonly used. Multiple transfusion, malnutrition, neonatal prematurity, where the patients actually present with necrotizing enterocolitis, and then later we detect clinically suspected to have necrotizing enterocolitis, but later diagnosed with mucormycosis. There is also a group of patients who are on voriconazole who are at higher risk of developing mucormycosis. So coming to how the pathophysiology works, so we should have a susceptible host. Why? Generally, the hyphae which are present along the mucosa, when they come into the bloodstream, the first thing that acts is the even before coming to the tissue macrophages start attacking them, and they are supposed to be controlled. Even if they escape the tissue macrophage, then the innate immunity of the neutrophils, circulating neutrophils, are supposed to take care of the hyphae which have reached the bloodstream. So when these are again lacking, the hyphae float around. Apart from the initial activity of neutrophils in controlling the fungal hyphae, they also fail in producing the cytokines which are required for controlling this fungal dissemination. So all put together, we should generally have a susceptible host for the fungus. Instead of just being a colonizing agent, now starts becoming an invasive agent. So they can start entering the body either through inhalation or by ingestion, implantation, or even inoculation. By any of these routes, once they start entering the blood vessels, that is the angio invasion occurs, then they go for hematogenous dissemination and finally the organ involvement. Depending upon the organs that are involved, there is again a classification. They can be rhino-orbital or rhino-cerebral. There is also rhino-orbital cerebral mucormycosis, ROCM. We can have pulmonary mucormycosis, gastrointestinal mucormycosis, cutaneous. In some individuals, we have disseminated where multiple organs are involved, and sometimes rarely involving CNS also. This is a collage of images where mucormycosis involving various structures have been demonstrated. So this is a H&E image of an rhino orbital mucormycosis. This is a sinus epithelium, columnar epithelium that is there, and the invasion of mucormycosis seen, and CNS involvement of mucormycosis. This image, this is actually the GMS stain, where we can find the fungal hyphae present within the blood vessel. This is a case of gastric mucormycosis. We can find the small necrotic ulcer here. This is an jejunal mucormycosis. So they can predominantly affect any organ that is in an immunosusceptible individual. Coming to the system that is involved, that determines the signs and symptoms of the patients who are suffering from mucormycosis. For example, a patient with pulmonary mucormycosis will predominantly present with a respiratory symptom, such as hemoptysis, difficulty in breathing, and lung infiltrates. And rhinocerebral mucormycosis and can have cellulite presentation as in cellulitis, necrosis of the skin, palatal necrosis, and ophthalmoplegia. GI, again, we'll be discussing in detail further, where they can have signs of peritonitis, bleeding, and obstruction. Cutaneous in the form of black necrotic lesions, and CNS in the form of ear pain, convulsions, and paralysis. But why I wanted to project this slide was to see the differential diagnosis. For all the symptoms which involve a particular system, we have very close and common differential diagnosis. For example, in orbital swelling, the more common will be an orbital cellulitis rather than actually mucormycosis. For in case of a bowel obstruction, when we encounter in an GI mucormycosis, there are so many other causes of bowel obstruction which you would like to think rather than GI mucormycosis. So this makes the diagnosis, clinical diagnosis of mucormycosis slightly difficult in an unfamiliar environment. For those patients who are already having risk factors such as an hematological malignancy or on chemotherapy, then it sometimes raises clinical suspicion. However, in the absence of any of these risk factors, it's very difficult to make a clinical diagnosis of mucormycosis because they have very close mimickers of common differential diagnosis. Coming to the intestinal mucormycosis, this as GI mucormycosis, the most common involvement is the stomach, which is then followed by the colon and ileum. In the past, actually, many of the patients were predominantly belonging to the neonatal group, premature children who were diagnosed with necrotizing enterocolitis, and then after surgery were detected to have, or on autopsy were detected to have intestinal mucormycosis. In fact, one of the hypotheses of necrotizing enterocolitis is an evidence of mucormycosis. They occur in the background of the risk factors such as already elicited before, immunocompromised status, those who have retroviral infection, SLE, and organ transplant. I just wanted to put forth two interesting hypotheses as well. Like this report that was published in 2004, where they saw a sudden outbreak of gastric mucormycosis in an ICU setting over a period of 14 weeks. So roughly 3.5 months, they started having 5 patients who had gastric mucormycosis, and hence they started analyzing why it occurred. So this is the details of the patients. We can find they are already compromised. They are having multi-organ failure, sepsis. The patients are, the few patients are alcohol. They were diagnosed based on gastric biopsy in 4 of the 5 individuals, and 1 required an autopsy. The primary complaint in these individuals were GI bleed, which was present in 3 out of 5, whereas 2 others had ulcerative lesions. What the study did was they tried to take the swab from the wooden tongue depressor that was used, and they also took a swab from the spoons that were used to feed these patients, and they started recognizing Rhizopus was a colonizer in these spoon and the tongue depressor. So they just followed up for the next 6 months where they didn't use the wooden thing. They started using the plastic spoons, and they started intensifying the sterilization of their ICUs. They ensured that the doctors and the staff nurse who visit these individuals are compliant with all the regulations of ICU, and they didn't find any other further outbreak of mucormycosis in the next 6 months. Meaning to say, there can be an iatrogenic component also in patients already compromised to develop mucormycosis. Again, another study, this was an outbreak that was found in an hematological ICU. So the environment is already favorable. Over a period of 6 months, this group found nearly 12 patients. And then they wanted to analyze why suddenly there is an outbreak. So they started comparing patients who had mucormycosis and those patients who didn't develop mucormycosis in the immediate past. So they were taken as the control. And to be frank, they had done a very good study by means of analyzing the stool cultures of these patients. So they made the diagnosis of mucormycosis if there were three components. One is the clinical component of symptoms. It can be either abdominal pain or GI bleed. And radiological component where an CT showed an ileal thickening or a small bowel thickening. And microbiological evaluation of the stool, which should demonstrate a rhizopus. If the patient was asymptomatic and there was no CT findings of bowel wall thickening and just the stool showed rhizopus, they were not considered as mucormycosis. So that validates their claim of this number of patients as mucormycosis and not mere colonization. And then they started analyzing what are the predisposing factors. All had hematological malignancies, all had some amount of immunosuppression, some had steroids. So there was no particular predisposing factor they could identify. Then they started checking all the drug samples and the food that were given to these individuals. And this was what they found. They found that they could isolate rhizopus from the allopurinol tablets, vials that were provided from the pharmacy. And they were also surprised to find that the ready to eat, that is biscuits, sandwiches, also had rhizopus colonization. So this was followed by a protocol where they ensured that no colonization could occur, and the strict sterile preparation of the diet was monitored. And then they found a reduction in the incidence of mucormycosis. Coming to review of literature with respect to intestinal mucormycosis, there is no hard evidence, possibly because the rare entity and it's usually found in an incidental way. And it is not possible for us to have a cohort or an RCT except for drug therapy. And even coming to drug therapy, they include the entire spectrum of mucormycosis, rhino, cerebral mucormycosis, pulmonary mucormycosis. So it's probably very difficult to talk only about intestinal mucormycosis. They are predominantly knowledge derived from various retrospective analysis and case reports. To be frank, they form the bulk of the evidence we have regarding intestinal mucormycosis. So we did a brief PubMed review, which includes only intestinal mucormycosis. The gastric mucormycosis is not part of this review. With an filter of English language and only humans. A result of nearly 98 studies were there, and which included 100 and I think 130 individuals. Coming to the epidemiology of this review, we had patients from newborn up to 66 years of age. It included 68 males and 52 females. Out of these 120 individuals, we had 76 patients who had hematological malignancies as the underlying risk factor. They can be either acute myeloid leukemia or acute lymphoblastic leukemia. There was one patient who had non-Hodgkin's lymphoma B cell variant, which also developed mucormycosis. There were 46 patients who had transplant performed, out of which 36 were a solid organ transplant. In fact, out of this 36, 31 is from a single retrospective analysis of solid organ transplant, which included liver, kidney, and multivisceral transplant. And they tried to analyze the incidence of mucormycosis. and 10 patients had stem cell transplant. Other patients which I thought of note were one patient who was on steroid for post-operative myelopathy. This patient will be discussing later. There are numerous patients who are in the setting of ICU, predominantly suffering from pneumonia, or as one patient had meningococcal septicemia. There was also one patient who was requiring steroids for IBD. Our patient was slightly different in the form that he didn't have any comorbidities apart from the ischemic heart disease, and he had undergone a recent cardiac surgery. So, taking both into consideration, I could find two literature which spoke about mucormycosis following cardiac surgery. This is one study from Dutch, I believe, I'm not able to recollect, but where they had 7 patients reported with necrotizing enterocolitis after cardiac surgery for congenital heart disease. And the first 2 patients listed in the 7 table, the one with the first patient who had a treatment for congenital aortic valve stenosis, and the second patient who also had a concomitant hypoplastic aortic arch. Both these patients had demonstrated mucormycosis on their histopathological examination. So again, that again highlights that post cardiac surgery, NOMI, necrotizing enterocolitis, even when they are common, the clinical diagnosis goes in their favor rather than a thought process which is of mucormycosis existing. This is another patient published from India, a case report where a patient had undergone a surgery for cyanotic congenital heart disease at the age of 17. He had got multiple previous cerebral abscesses related to the cyanotic heart disease. And post surgery, POD4, he developed myelopathy manifested by respiratory weakness. So he was started on steroid. And on 25th day of post-operative day of surgery, patient started developing abdominal distension, pain, and tenderness, suggestive of a perforation peritonitis. On exploration, found to have an ileocecal perforation. And patient underwent right hemicolectomy. Post-op diagnosis of mucormycosis was made. Our patient succumbed after antifungals as well. Our patient also had acute renal failure. There was rhabdomyolysis in this patient. So, just wanted to find out if there are any other conditions, reports regarding mucormycosis which can complicating acute renal failure. This is a study which I came across, published in 2000, where they reported 7 patients, reviewed 7 patients with the involvement of various organs, rhinocerebral, GI, pulmonary. There was even an evidence of cutaneous mucormycosis with various etiology of the renal disease. We can find that 4 out of the 7 had actually expired. Only 2 had recovered. So how do they present? Coming to intestinal tuberculosis, majority are present with either perforation peritonitis or intestinal obstruction. In the case of neonates, necrotizing enterocolitis is the most common form of presentation. There are few cases where mesenteric ischemia was was the clinical diagnosis, and exploration found to have mucormycosis. Like our patient had a GE bleed as well. So to be frank, our patient came in both the mesenteric ischemia group as well as the GA bleed group. The other less common presentations were GA bleed. Mind you, again, this I'm talking with respect to only intestinal perforation. With respect to gastric perforation, GA bleed is definitely more common as a presenting symptom. There are 3 cases of fistulizing diseases where patient developed a fistula from an artery to an sigmoid, artery to an ileum. There was also fistula of a right ureter to the ileum. So there are various fistulizing diseases also been reported. There are a couple of patients who presented like acute appendicitis and underwent appendicectomy. Only the appendicectomy found to have mucormycosis. Patients presented with big, liver abscess, where liver FNA showed the presence of fungal infection. Coming to the diagnosis, it's predominantly a surprise. Very rarely, an diagnosis of mucormycosis is made in a pre-operative setting or before the patient undergoes autopsy. yes, there have been increased awareness. So patients who are undergoing treatment in hematological malignancies, there is a slightly increased awareness about this entity, and the preoperative suspicion is right, but still diagnosis is not conclusive without having an histology. There are 5 cases who had diagnosis made on colonoscopy alone. As I said, nowadays we have started thinking about this etiology in case of high-risk individuals such as post-transplant and patients with hematological malignancies. Coming to treatment, the goal of treatment is surgical resection as well as antifungal. With respect to the surgical resection, the review as such, when I found, it was more done when the etiology is not known. Whenever the diagnosis was made preoperatively, the mainstay of treatment is antifungal and correcting the underlying uh, condition. So the antifungal can be amphotericin B, which is the first choice, followed by posaconazole, itraconazole, or capsofungins. In case the patient doesn't improve with antifungal, then the patient undergoes surgery if a preoperative diagnosis has been made. In the absence of preoperative diagnosis, generally the surgery is performed, and then after the pathology comes as an histological surprise, then antifungals are started. And I found this group of individuals to have very poor outcomes. Probably there is a delay in initiating antifungal in these individuals that can relate. It's very difficult to say as of now. I've not done the statistical part of it, but those patients who are diagnosed after surgery definitely had a poorer outcome compared to those patients who had a preoperative detection of mucormycosis. Outcomes, um, around 1/3 survived in the intestinal mucormycosis, and there was a slight relation with blood vessel involvement and delayed initiation of antifungal, as I described earlier. But the review can be biased because it is not the complete information. This compilation of review articles also included those which are in the form of quizzes, images. So we didn't have the complete information. Uh, and some we might patients who are uh, suspected to have nomia generally don't undergo autopsy for us to know that whether the true etiology was nomia or necrotizing enterocolitis, whether it is in uh, mucormycosis. So again, diagnosis itself is going to be a problem. The search terms as I showed only 2 patients with disseminated. One patient had a lung, liver, brain involvement. Other patient had a concomitant lung involvement, which is quite rare. We might have, if you the search term is widened, we might have more patients with a concomitant GI involvement rather than isolated GI involvement. And as I said before, gastric mucormycosis doesn't turn up in this search. For study needing to review about gastric mucormycosis, we need to search the term gastric mucormycosis. So that can again be a part of the bias why we have a better outcome as per this. I just could find a series from India, only one. Rest were all case reports, probably 1 or 2. This was one from AIIMS, where they had 8 patients who had mucormycosis. Again, see the just wanted to highlight the clinical diagnosis that were made. They were either necrotizing enterocolitis, Hirschsprung disease, cystic fibrosis, necrotizing, and so these were all patients who are in the younger age group. In the elderly, they were suspected to have malignancies. So this forms the crux in delaying the treatment. And by the time we either do a surgery or and then get the report, patient has already gone in for a disseminated disease. I could find only one article which was talking about GA mucormycosis in a COVID-19 patient. I am sure we are likely to have an more evidence by in another 2 or 3 months. But right now, this is the only one which was published in Clinical Endoscopy, where patient had a gastric mucormycosis. Patient developed GA bleed, and this patient succumbed within 36 hours. Our index patient had a lot of underlying factors which could have predisposed. He was a post cardiac arrest patient. He had a cardiac surgery. We don't know whether it was an on pump or off pump bypass surgery that was performed. He had a prolonged multi-organ failure in the form of inotropic requirement, prolonged ventilator. He needed dialysis. There was an underlying acute renal failure, which, as one of the studies showed, can predispose to mucormycosis. Patient had broad spectrum antibiotics, multiple lines in view of the prolonged ICU care, again predisposing to fungal invasion. Thus, as such, with intestinal mucormycosis, it's very difficult to make a preoperative diagnosis. Yes, and clinical awareness of risk factors can help in at least including them in one of the differential diagnoses. I think any surgeon who is now going through the COVID-related acute abdomen will always keep mucormycosis in our mind. But in pre-COVID era, it was always a difficult. A patient with abdominal pain, loose stools, and tenderness on examination. Many times we think in terms of especially if the call comes from an hematology ICU, then we think in terms of neutropenia related colitis or a pseudomembranous colitis because patient was on broad spectrum antibiotics for a lot. Sometimes patient present with massive GI bleed, we think it is thrombocytopenia related GI bleed. So all these things are very great mimickers and difficult to make a clinical diagnosis of intestinal mucormycosis. Patients are generally compromised. They have broad spectrum antibiotics. They are on multiple organ support. There is an underlying immunosuppression. So I don't know whether there is a way in future where we start screening these high individual with some stool analysis as predicted, as recommended by one of the studies.
Yeah, thanks, Gautam. And that's a very exhaustive lecture on intestinal mucormycosis. And actually, we are privileged to have Dr. Bhanumati Ramakrishna, an eminent pathology professor of pathology, hepatopathology, especially from CMC Vellore, and presently she is with us. And I shall be glad if she can come on screen and give her comments on her experience with mucor over the last 3-4 decades. Madam, if you can unmute and come.
Thank you, Dr. Radhakrishna. I didn't expect I'm supposed to comment on this. And actually, like Gautam has said, we usually have seen with the patients with diabetic and but this is probably the first case I'm seeing without any underlying other comorbidities. But I think when I found out that this patient had a resuscitation and then after CABGs, probably some underlying ischemia, but this is actually the first case in the intestinal mucormycosis I'm seeing. And but recently, I think after COVID, we have been getting now quite a lot of from ENT and neuro, like rhinocerebral and other cases of mucormycosis. And
do you normally see any mucor in bowel specimens, resected specimens as a
not usually, not very common.
Now, how will you correlate mucor to this pathology? I mean, the bowel gangrene and ischemia. How do you call that? This is the cause.
No, actually, no. This patient actually, we had a problem. I mean, when I looked at it last year, we didn't know about the other clinical history. But when we had the specimen, we were really surprised because this is the first time I'm seeing on a necrotic. Normally, in a necrotic tissue, you may see some candida and other stuff. But mucormycosis is something very unusual. I'm seeing for the first time. And because we didn't have any underlying clinical history that point of time when we received the specimen. But this is something very unusual. But I've seen in other diabetic and other sites, but not in the GI mucormycosis. This is something unusual. But the patients with other, like if they're in chemotherapy or in autopsies, we have seen. But in a live surgical cases in intestinal mucormycosis, this is probably, as far as I remember, I think this may be the first case.
Yeah. Prathapan, you can come. The Prathapan is the chief of surgical gastroenterology, Calicut Medical College. Madam, yeah, Prathapan.
I have not seen a case of mucormycosis of in the GI tract. I have seen in rhinocerebral mucormycosis as a house surgeon or postgraduate. But I think in transplant setting, the incidence of these sort of fungal infections is actually coming down. They are all taking
Yeah.
specific precautions in preventing this sort of fungal infection. Because if you see the transplant scenario, I don't think the incidence is high. It is high when you have unexpected situations like immunosuppression to other conditions like inflammatory bowel disease, or if you take other type of patients like a cancer patient or diabetic. Now I think the mask is an issue regarding the mucormycosis mask, because the people use the mask frequently, not the N95. When the layman uses the ordinary mask, and they will keep the mask outside the house, not in the inside the house. And these are the situations where you get a high incidence of fungal infection, because the wet mask can actually grow these sort of rhizopus or fungal mycelia. I think that is one reason in COVID. Maybe one reason in COVID.
No, but this usage of domestic masks, is it prevalent in other countries? Because here we have designer masks, we have masks, same mask, cloth mask we'll keep wearing day in day out. The general population. I don't know the rest of the world whether they use some sort of a disposable mask or a 3-layered mask or a N92.
No, sir, the issue in India is different, because here people are worried about, just like the helmet, people are worried about wearing the mask to avoid litigation by the police. Whereas in other country, they use the mask just to protect themselves. That is the basic difference. We wear helmet just to avoid the traffic fine and other things, rather than just to protect our head. That sort of situation is there, because the people are not worried about the quality of mask, the number of usage, whether you use it in other unclean situations and all. I think that may be one reason when we look into the fact, because we have very high number of mucormycosis in Calicut. At least 13 patients are admitted in ENT ward now. Some of them underwent removal of their eyes, along with the sinus
same story
excision.
all over, Gautam. The same
Yes, sir.
story.
Today our
Yes,
OTs had
yes.
3
I think
orbital excentrations.
Yeah, madam.
we have had, I think, from the last 1 week, maybe about 7-8 cases, quite a bit. At least 50% of them we had the eyeball removed also.
No, but this didn't happen in the first wave. We wonder what
Yes,
is
yes.
second wave, how was it different?
That's why I'm also surprised, because now people contributing about this oxygen, steroids, and the diabetic, but there are some reports saying without even underlying diabetic or without usage of steroids, various case reports are series are coming. I think we probably have to see from each institution what was the cause and clinical setup. We have to look into it, because if it is through the contamination of the oxygen, then a lot of people should get that. So I think maybe a multiple factors play a role, because it's very surprising. Like we have seen like all these cases in the bone marrow transplant, something in the autopsy cases in the past. But recently, even the transplant, like you said, I think we're not seeing that many like the way we are seeing now following COVID. So it's really surprising. So I thought the case that you presented, probably that's also COVID, but then we realize it's not COVID, and that is something interesting in intestinal without any other underlying comorbidities.
Gautam, as far as the COVID-induced mucor is concerned, is it happening during the active COVID period of 14 days, or is happening beyond that also?
I think
Must be after.
Predominantly
after.
after.
Yeah,
after recovery, sir. Predominantly after.
Sir, the issue in COVID, I think the COVID itself is not producing immunosuppression.
Yes.
Rather than it produces more hypersensitivity or immune-like reaction. We treat this with steroids or other thing, and that may be one reason for developing in the post-COVID era. Because when these patients develop post-COVID lungs problem, they all receive these sort of anti-inflammatory treatment, I think the steroids and all. I think most of them get in the post-COVID era rather than the active COVID period.
Now, do you mean to say that steroids weren't used elsewhere in the world to the extent we use in India?
The type of population are totally different. I don't know what happens in India, and because we have
pan India problem. Every city, every town has mucar.
Have you seen your wet towels and all getting black very fast in India? When you go to other countries, I don't think, because the climate will not allow this fungus to grow faster.
Okay.
Because I think the climate itself can be a contributor to this mucormycosis.
Any other comment on Dr. Amaravani? You have? I'm seeing you after a very long time. You have something to comment, madam?
Yeah. I also feel that I just saw this message in the Learning Journal Sajid and immediately, logged in that. See, I'm staying in Muscat. I'm working in Muscat. We don't, so far, see, we have not reported or anything like that mucormycosis, but very sick patients go to the government sector. They don't come into the private sector. Like most of the government sector beds are full, ICU beds are full. I was reading articles and everything. What they say that probably we are filling up the tap water in the humidifiers in auction and everything. Maybe that is one of the reason. I don't know whether it is really the reason. We don't try to put the sterile water or distilled water into the humidifiers. Is it one of the reasons why?
Ma'am, nowadays our hospital has done away with using water in humidifiers. I think that has become a more like an guidelines that we should not use water for the risk of infection. Possible at other areas, ma'am. I'm still difficult to say whether how much it's contributing to mucormycosis.
Because I think it's multifactorial.
Yes.
Studies have come up. I think it's diabetes. Not everybody is diabetic. Not everybody is on steroids. Not everybody is on oxygen. People at home also, they are getting mucormycosis. I think research and studies have to be conducted, I think, on this basis.
If I can ask Dr. Bhanumati, why is sinusitis and ophthalmitis is more common than any other area in the body?
I think that's one of the commonest area that this, I'm not sure whether why only that. It's generally in those areas only we see the fungal infections, and I'm not sure whether there's anything particular. I need to, sorry. And
Gautam, you have a comment on that?
That is even otherwise pulmonary and
Yeah,
rhinocerebral are the more common ones. Even other routine non-COVID era. GI component is very
maybe
low.
the sinus infection is more common
But
because
there's
it's
no pulmonary
respiratory,
mucormycosis,
inhaling.
right?
There is pulmonary mucormycosis.
Pulmonary. That's why maybe the inhaling factor through the nose.
Probably,
That's probably
root
it
of
is
inhalation
causing.
that's the most common
Yeah.
root of.
Prathapan, you have a comment on that?
No, I think we have the sinus is one space where this fungi can grow without much symptoms for a long time. I think that may be one reason, because other area it will be just swallowed and it go, or it will just spitted. But I think the most common location for fungus is in the sinus only.
Because of the inhalation part of it, that must be because all the infections come through the nose. So that must be the reason.
Any further comments before we close?
I think probably I think all the institute, wherever we are seeing cases, we probably have to analyze and see the background clinical history of all the mucormycosis. Because now everybody, all the literature, I mean, the case reports that are coming is like, some cases not diabetic, some are not on steroids, some are not on oxygen dependent. So maybe there is some multifactorial factors. I mean, we probably need to look at all these cases and come out, because why suddenly this surge of mucormycosis throughout India?
But is there any collective effort, madam, in this direction? Because, I think...
No, I think probably we have to kind of look into, multidisciplinary...
Pathologists are the first people to get involved in this because of there's a final pathway.
Yeah, whatever the tissue we get, we see, but I think the clinicians who is looking at it, we probably have to compile all the data and then look at what are the, analyze all our cases. I mean, each institute probably has to look into this because so many cases are coming out. And I think last week, Times of India, it says whatever the cases that has come out, more number of cases from CMC Vellore. That's what it said, the paper said. Maybe the large number of patients are going to that institute, so you're getting more number of patients. I think unless we analyze all the data, it will be very difficult to come out with the reason why it's so much increase in mucormycosis now.
One comment from my side, Dr. Katta. Dr. Gautam, I'm sorry I logged in late and I didn't listen to your presentation. I think it's an intestinal mucormycosis. If I remember it correctly, when we were drinking unpasteurized milk, we were getting intestinal cocks. That is because it was bypassing the oral tonsils and everything. That's how we were getting. That was one postulate because unpasteurized, that Mycobacterium bovis, not even Mycobacterium tuberculosis. Is there any reason why that it is coming through the milk or food or anything like that?
There are hypotheses, like the studies, we discussed 2 studies wherein in an ICU setting, they found an outbreak. They found the wooden tongue depressors to be colonized by the rhizopus. There's also another study which showed tablets and ready to eat food having a colonization of rhizopus. So it is possible now. There must be an extraneous source which is spreading this fungi. The problem right now is to identify the source. That is becoming more.
I think it's environmental, basically.
Gautam, this rhizopus comes from outside or it's commensal from within?
This comes from outside.
Oh, okay.
It's not endogenous.
Present everywhere, sir. It has to come from outside to it.
Okay. I think that's an important point. There are no more comments. I think it's an interesting case and have little extra knowledge about mucormycosis today. And I think we look forward to what's happening in literature as to, we hope we'll get some answers as to why this mucor has come all of a sudden. And, it's taking a huge toll on some of the patients who survived COVID, but couldn't avoid. And mucor is such a fatal disease. Thanks everyone. Thanks, Madam Bhanumathi, for being here with us. And
thank you.
And Pradhapan, thank you so much. We'll see you soon. Take care. Thank you. Thanks, Gautam.
Thank you.
Thank you.